Welcome to Empowering You, a strengths-based podcast for leaders of leaders, with your host, Dr. Shauna T. Sobers. Welcome back, leaders, to Empowering You. I'm your host, Dr. Shauna T. Sobers, and today we're going to talk about strengths psychology and the professional and personal development of self. All right, so all starting with Don Clifton. Now, Don Clifton, who's the namesake of CliftonStrengths, in 2002 got recognized with a presidential commendation from the American Psychology Association as the father of strengths-based psychology and the grandfather of positive psychology. That's so cool, especially because, side note, Don Clifton wrote one of the first books to come out. I know it's all tattered and everything, but Strengths Quest. Here's what it looks like updated now. But Strengths Quest, discover and develop your strengths in academics, career, and beyond. So notice that it's written by Don Clifton and Edward Chip Anderson, PhD. I don't know if you can see it. Edward Chip Anderson. Edward Chip Anderson was my faculty member and trainer for learning how to coach in CliftonStrengths. So I feel like I have a personal connection to the strengths-based movement and strengths-based psychology. I like to consider myself the granddaughter of CliftonStrengths and of the strengths-based movement. Anyways, so I just want to go back a little bit to help you understand where this thought came from the beginning. So Don Clifton went to University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and while he was there, he was studying psychology. And most of how they studied psychology at the time was to study people who were sick and find out all of the nuances and symptoms and everything, and then figure out how to then help people get well. Well, Don Clifton went off to World War II. He was a pilot, and he saw a lot of death, a lot of destruction, and a lot of negativity. So when he returned to his research and studies, he began to question, why are we doing it this way? Why are we focusing on what's wrong with people in order to help people with what's right with them? And so then the question that now we use for positive psychology came to bear. What would happen if we studied what was right with people versus what's wrong with them, or what things to fix? And that really came from his work in the war. So now he goes back, he challenges this, he begins to do research, and his research was around identifying the talents of successful people. Okay. And so they did a lot of this through interviewing. They would reach out to Fortune 500 companies and ask that question over and over again. And he founded a company called Selection Research Incorporated, SRI. And he did that in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he helped public and private entities with their employee selections. My understanding of how it went down was a company would say, I want to hire this position. And they would say, go ahead, continue your search as you would normally. They would gather, what are kind of the job functions, et cetera. They would go out and interview people in like positions and identify what are some of the themes and characteristics and abilities of the people in that position, till they got it down to an interview guide, let's say. And then they went back when that company had picked their top candidates, their finalists. Then they would answer that series of questions and be able to help them identify, this is going to be a person who's going to most likely thrive and succeed in that particular position, because you're asking them to do certain tasks or think in a certain way. And eventually that company, SRI, became or was acquired, let's say, by Gallup. And this was in 1988. And then Don Clifton became the chairman of Gallup. So that's kind of how that connection between Gallup and then this assessment came to be. So then they started writing books. And so I have some of them here. Soar with Your Strengths came out, and that was with Don Clifton and Paula Nelson. Then that CliftonStrengths one, specifically to higher education. Then came, I think it was Now Discover Your Strengths. So the Strengths Quest came in 1994. Soar with Your Strengths was 1992. Now Discover Your Strengths was 2001. Now Discover Your Strengths, the revolutionary program that shows you how to develop your unique talents and strengths and those of people you manage. It's based on the Gallup study of over 2 million people. So that was Marcus Buckingham and Don Clifton. That one was really, really popular. And then How Full Is Your Bucket? And we'll talk about this one in a later episode. But this one is How Full Is Your Bucket? Positive Strategies for Work and Life. And this was done with Tom Rath, who's the grandson of Don Clifton. So those are some of the books that came out early in this movement. And it was really Chip Anderson that kind of put that bug in Don Clifton's ear of, hey, in about, in the 90s, this thing, the internet was coming out, and he kind of said, hey, how about we, this is the way that you're going to be able to expand and scale what you're doing with this psychology. And so that's how the assessment came out, and they whittled all those down to 34, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to then talk to you all about the way that we think about development. I want to talk to you now about the conventional approach to personal development. And how we typically think about personal development is we identify the improvement areas that we have, because we're so good in our society to question what's wrong, what's broken, what's missing, what do we not have. We have a lot of language around what we want to fix, what we want to improve, where we want to grow to, areas of growth, opportunities, etc. And so that's currently our model of identify what's wrong and then develop a plan to fix it. Okay, here are some of the assumptions with this current model. That you can learn most, if not all, behaviors to a level of excellence. That is the assumption. That if I put in the work, if I put in the time, if I do the study, whatever it is that I want to do, I can do it to a level of excellence. Second thing, if you try hard enough, you can master anything. And then third, fixing weaknesses leads to success. Those are the current assumptions around personal development. If you maintain your strength and you work on fixing your weaknesses, that's what we need to do. Okay, so with a strengths-based approach to personal development, it's more about identifying our strengths and what we're good at, what we're naturally gifted in. Again, remembering the definition of that talent is a natural recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that could be productively applied. So identifying that strength and then developing that strength. That's the approach to personal development. So here, the assumptions are you can learn only some behaviors to a level of excellence. You can't do everything, but there's going to be some niche things that you're going to do well to the point that you do it better than other people. And that the second thing is people contribute best in very unique ways. And finally, the third, fixing weaknesses prevents failure, yes, but building strengths, that's going to take developing those talents that are naturally you're gifted in. I remember back in the elementary school days, I would get a report card and I have to come home. I know the anxiety rises. I have to come home and show my mom, here's my report card. And typically, when asked, hey, if you brought home a report card and you had, let's say, 4 A's, 2 B's, 2 C's, and an overall grade of B, what would be the focus of that conversation with your parent, guardian, whomever? And time again, we hear, oh, it's that we're going right for the C. We're going right for the quote unquote problem area so that we can fix it. We can, take it head on. We can get tutors for it. We can all the things. It's the C's. And with a positive psychology or strengths-based psychology lens, we would instead say, maybe let's start with the A's or the B's. Let's start with what's going right, what's going well. And it's not to say to ignore or not address the C's, because we need to. Rather, it's spending most of our time in those A's and B's. Now, how would you do that? So we would say, okay, what were the classes that you got A's in? What was it about that teacher that kept you engaged in that particular subject topic? What style did they, display? How did you study for that? Like, really take that into consideration as we're diving into how to implement a personal or professional development plan. What's going right? And what are the themes there that we can pull out from that? So that then when we develop a plan, rather than it being, you're doing this wrong, you need to focus more in this area that already is not natural to you, we can say, how do we bring your strengths into the area that you need to bring up a little bit so that it doesn't get in the way of your, in this case, grades, but of your success, of your development, etc. And so we would then say, okay, if we notice these are the things that are working over here, how can we infuse that in this area where you need to grow? Do we change where you're sitting? Do we change how you're studying, who you're studying with, what environment you're studying in? Do we shift how we're talking to you about it? Because the more we can understand what works for you, then the more we can, put that in place in the areas that don't come as naturally to you. Can we barter? Can you tutor someone else and someone else tutor you? So some of the 3 ways in Soar With Your Strengths, it talks about this, the 3 ways that you can address some of those weaknesses. You can eliminate it, and we often don't have that, option of I can't not take this class or I can't not do this part of my job. But sometimes we're able to, get rid of it or give it to someone else. So that's the number 2. We can delegate it. So that could look like actually giving it to someone else if you're in the supervisory role. But in this case, it might be a bartering, partner with someone, do it alongside someone, have some body doubling happening, or some champions and celebrators of here's the milestones along the way, someone maybe with developer as a talent. Or you can say, I'll do all of this part of the project. If you do I'll do all the research if you do all the talking during the presentation, because this is my strong suit and it's going to come easier to me and that's yours. And so we can both, win in that way. So delegating it, eliminating it, delegating it, or the third piece, automate it. So find ways, systems, processes that you can then make it a little bit easier for you to do that thing that, doesn't come as naturally to you. And so that might look like, for me, it's putting on reminders on the phones and devices and things like that, creating a template that then I can use when I'm doing a particular report or something of that nature. getting proofreaders, etc. So, or even recording yourself talking out loud, those sort of things. So that's one example in like a school children kind of way. Another example is maybe we get to college and we testing into college, and then a person says, well, now you need to go to remedial whatever subject matter is. Wow, doesn't that make your confidence take a dip? And yet then we're curious and wondering, why isn't this person being successful? Because now we're trying to get everyone's supposed to get here, and we're saying you're down here and you have to do things to come up. Well, they're going to keep going up. You're never going to catch up, right? So rather than having a marker that everyone has to hit and go, rather than having remedial something, because then I'm already feeling like I don't belong here. The imposter syndrome comes on. I don't belong here. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. Da, da, da. And so what happens when you're already in that mindset and then you're trying to do something? You're probably not going to be as successful as you could be. And that's what we're doing. At least Chip talks about this in Strengths Class. His first line of the book is, I was wrong, because he was an academic coordinator and he had approached things very differently before meeting Don Clifton. And so he questioned his whole career and approach to how to work with students. And one of the things was, instead of saying you have remedial or you need to take remedial classes, rather it's like, how can we lift you up and give you that confidence of, this is what you do well. How do we help you learn how to do this thing that you do well in this setting? So you're already coming with something to give, and you're already recognizing that though we're in different levels, it doesn't change that part of it. But in this particular area, I might be higher, this person might be lower, and in something else, like an equalizer. Like there's different levels for everything, rather than one standard that everyone has to meet. And the way that we're measuring it is making people feel inferior and then potentially dropping out. And that was what was often studied. They would study people who had left, who had dropped out, who the system didn't work for, rather than who was sustaining. Let's find out why that is. What makes you stay? What are the things that are working, and how do we build that even more, rather than let's think about what's not working and fix that. So you see how those differences in the approach to development can kind of shift your approach in your own personal life or your professional development as well. Thank you for tuning in to Empowering You, a strengths-based podcast for leaders of leaders, with me, Dr. Shauna T. Sobers. I really hope this episode inspired and equipped you to step boldly into your leadership journey. Together, let's build a community of empowered leaders lifting each other up. Until next time, remember to lead with your strengths, live with purpose, and always empower you. Leaders, if you found this valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and share this post with others who could benefit from the insights and encouragement that I've shared here today. See you next time.